We invite you to stay tuned for the live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study of the Mayfield Drive Baptist Church, located at 271 Mayfield Drive, Smyrna, Tennessee. We will now join the service. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we're going to get started with our Wednesday evening Bible study. And I want to draw your attention. I want to draw your attention to the screen. And apologies, had to move something real quick. Tonight we're going to begin Lesson 5, and I have it as Lesson 5A, and that was purely because there was way more than we could cover in one session at all. Nothing that I was going to be able to do was going to be able to cover this in one session, so trying to make sure that we actually document it correctly so I can keep track, and anyone that's watching can keep track, and those in attendance can keep track. So we're going to begin with 52 lessons by Dr. Ben Bogard. This is Lesson 5, The Law of Moses. Remember I said in the last couple of lessons that we would be doing Genesis, Exodus, then we were going to actually take the law and kind of, it would have its own. We do the Law of Moses on its own, as its own lessons. Simply because it's very complex. And Dr. Bogard doesn't get into a huge amount of detail into it. Y'all don't have to do anything. So, tonight, we're going to start the Law of Moses. So the first question we're going to ask is, where are the 10 Commandments found? Obviously, we're looking at Exodus. That's right, Exodus chapter 20. We're going to look at verses 3 through 17. We're going to read these verses. We're going to read all of them, because the next question then asks some specific questions, which those in attendance have a handout, that the next question is, what are the 10 Commandments? And I will give those to you once we get to that question. I'll give you those to you in short format, very short answer, because some of them seem kind of long. Exodus chapter 20, verse number 3 says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the 10th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. The 7th day, yes. Verse 10, thank you. But the 7th day, see? We all make mistakes. But the 7th day is the Sabbath. Man, 10 days in a week, that would drive me nuts. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Whew, that's a lot. Now the next question is, what are the 10 Commandments? Now we know where they're found. Let's look at the 10 Commandments. Number 1, the first 10 Commandments found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Every time I've ever heard this talked about, this point's always mentioned, and I think it's very valid. That is gods with a little G-O-D. Our one true and living God didn't say there wasn't other gods. He just said he was the only true and living God. Number 2, Exodus chapter 20, verse 4. Thou shalt not make any graven image. This doesn't mean you're not supposed to make statues. This doesn't mean that you can't have a bust made. This does not mean those things. You have to look at it real closely. Any graven image of something that you worship. For those that worship money, can't make a graven image of a dollar bill. Number 3, Exodus chapter 20, verse number 5. Thou shalt not bow before or serve any other gods. That's the easiest way to say that. Again, tried to shorten it up a little bit. Be concise. Thou shalt not bow before or serve any other gods. God was very specific to Moses about those two things. The fourth of the 10 Commandments is found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. He's very specific about that as well. Number 5, Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Honor thy father and mother. Number 6, found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. I can't make it any more concise. Thou shalt not kill. Number 7, Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Again, can't make it any more concise than God gave it. Number 8, Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. Thou shalt not steal. The law gets into much more complications about theft. But the reason the law gets into complications about theft is simply because it gives penalties. So it has to get a little bit more complicated. The main commandment was, thou shalt not steal. Number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness. Now it says thy neighbor. Anybody know why it says thy neighbor? Everybody's kind of your neighbor. Well, it says, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Because whoever you come in contact with is your neighbor. Everyone's kind of your neighbor. But now, fast forward to the New Testament. What does Jesus say the 2 greatest commandments are? Right. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul. What is the second that he says? Love thy neighbor as thyself. All right. Number 10. Last but not least, Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. Thou shalt not covet. And he says a lot of things you shouldn't covet, which basically encompasses everything you shouldn't covet. Note to self, coveting is wrong. Doesn't matter what it is. If it's not yours, it belongs to somebody else. And if you want it, that's covetous. That's coveting something that belongs to someone else. Next question. When did the law require all slaves to be released? Yes, there was slavery in the Bible. Exodus chapter 21, verse 2. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. Now, the rest of this chapter gives a whole lot of details about what you can and cannot do with slaves. A whole lot of stuff. But the answer is 6 years. The law required all slaves to be released in 6 years. At the end of 6 years. On the 7th year, completion of 6 years, they were to be released. Free. Next question. When should the land have a rest? Exodus chapter 23, verses 10 and 11. You're right, Sister Katie. A lot of these are the same. Oh, so somebody's reading ahead.
Well, I kind of knew about the land because I heard it regarding it too.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why we say that in every 7 years you have to let the land rest. All right? God didn't give it in the law just to give it. He gave it for a reason, to replenish the land. He knew the land would need to be replenished to continue growing, right? In 6 years, thou shalt sow thy land and shalt gather in the fruits thereof. But the 7th year thou shalt let it rest and lie still, that the poor of thy people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field shall eat. In like manner thou shalt deal with thy vineyard and with thy olive yard.
Yeah, Brother Jamie, it's very important to understand that 6 years and then the 7th year. That was one reason why they went into captivity, was because of that reason.
Yep. One of the reasons they went in captivity is because they didn't follow the law. That's basically what it boils down to. They didn't follow the law. God said, as I was reading through Exodus, and several times God told Moses that the children of Israel were a stiff-necked people, proud. And a stiff neck doesn't bow. You can't bow a stiff neck. It doesn't work. It's like a 2x4. you can't make a 2x4 curve. If you do, it's not a good 2x4 anymore, right? But God said the children of Israel were stiff-necked people. The answer to the question is every 7th year, you're required to let the land rest. The next question that is asked, what were the 3 great feasts? The answer we're going to find in Exodus chapter 23, verses 14 through 17. They're not mentioned specifically by name in these verses. However, you will find them later on, mentioned specifically by name. 3 times thou shalt keep a feast unto me in the year. In other words, 3 times a year you're going to have feasts. Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread. What was the feast of unleavened bread? Feast of the Passover. Remember? Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded thee, in the time appointed of the month Abib, for in it thou camest out from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of thy labors, which thou hast sown in the field, and which is that one, the feast of harvest. What is that? Guess? No guesses?
In the fall, when you harvest all your fruits and vegetables.
Negative. All right. And the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of the year, when thou hast gathered in thy labors out of the field. That's the one you're thinking of. The feast of ingathering. So, 3 times in the year all thy males shall appear before the Lord God. First one is the Passover. Feast of unleavened bread, also called the Passover. The second is the Pentecost. Remember? And the third is the Tabernacle. Feast of Tabernacle. Three main feasts, 3 main holy times of the year. Now, next question. How many days did Moses spend in the mountain alone with God? Now, before I go to this, I want to ask the quick question. Are you seeing symbolism as we've gone through Genesis and Exodus, and now we're in the law? Are you seeing the symbolism of the Bible? You notice that 7th day, 7, 7, 7. How many days did Moses, all right, just think about it here real quick. How many days did Moses spend in the mountain alone with God? Just a quick guess. Man, I hate having pastor in the class. Exodus chapter 24, verse 18. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud and gat him up onto the mountain, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. Yes. Yeah, 40 days and 40 nights. Yes, sir. The number of comments made that the number 40 is the number of testing. Why is it said that? It rained 40 days and 40 nights. Moses went up unto the mount 40 days and 40 nights. What other significant thing was done for 40 days and 40 nights? Jesus was what? More importantly about that, Jesus was fasted and tempted of the devil 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. That is the reason why All of these things, 40 days, 40 nights. There's symbolism in the scriptures, and they mean something. 40 days and 40 nights. Next question. I love this one. And actually, Dr. Garner really does not get into talking too much about the tabernacle. It doesn't get too much into the Ark of the Covenant, just a little bit, but all of that went on for the tabernacle, he doesn't really get into that. And that's a year-long study just on the tabernacle or just on the temple alone, all right? But he does talk about the Ark of the Covenant. So the question is, describe the Ark of the Covenant and the contents. And we will answer these questions. Sister Katie looks at me funny. We will answer these, I promise. Exodus chapter 25, verses 10 through 16. And they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, within and without shalt thou overlay it, and shalt make upon it a crown of gold round about. And thou shalt cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in the 4 corners thereof. And 2 rings shall be in the one side of it, and 2 rings in the other side of it. And thou shalt make staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold. And thou shalt put the staves into the rings by the sides of the ark, that the ark may be borne with them. The staves shall be in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it. And thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee. First thing about the ark, description, it was a box. That's what it was. It was a box. Made of shittim wood, also known as acacia wood. The second thing about the Ark of the Covenant, it was 2.5 cubits long by 1.5 cubits wide by 1.5 cubits tall. It was completely covered in gold. It was completely covered in gold inside and out. Sister Katie's got to get her hand really moving.
Yeah.
The next one, it had 2 gold rings on each side for the gold-covered staves of shittim wood to carry the ark. Apologies, had a little bit of a technical difficulty there. The next, the staves were not to be taken out of the rings. Once they were put in, they were to be left. I don't know about you, but I hate when I have something that I use to carry something with or something along that line, and I move it or take it off, and I put it somewhere for safekeeping, and then I can't find it again. I don't know if that was God's reason, but God was very specific. They were not to be taken off. The last and final thing is the contents were a testimony that God gave them. Now, question is, what testimony would that possibly be? There was more on there on that tablet than the 10 Commandments. But yes, the law, the covenant that God gave them, the law was the covenant that was to be put inside the ark of the covenant. The box for the covenant, if you will. The box for the law. If you want to be real technical, it was the box for the law. That's the name, box for the law. So, the next question is, were the first 2 tables of the law put into the ark? Very interesting story here. So Moses is up there talking to God. God's telling him all about the law. He's laying things down for Moses. And God wrote the law, the entire law, on stone tablet, 2 stone tables. God wrote on them with his finger. And unlike the 10 Commandments movie that you see with Charlton Heston, which has the 10 Commandments on that stone tablet, the entire law was written on that stone tablet. Moses didn't have to remember the law. It was written down in stone. That's where that saying, written in stone, comes from. Because there's only one person who ever wrote in stone, and that was God himself. I say person, one entity that ever has written in stone, that was God. You read that, and he wrote it with his finger. Exodus chapter 32, verse 19. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, this is Moses, that he saw the calf. Little backup story. Children of Israel, they're getting kind of anxious. Moses has been gone a long time. They're kind of losing their minds because Moses has been gone a long time. So they get Aaron to make a golden calf. Anybody knows that story of the golden calf? Well, Moses comes down. He sees the calf. And they're dancing and worshiping the calf. Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands and brake them beneath the mount. He got mad. Righteous anger. He's been up there talking with God, and he comes down, and the children of Israel are now worshiping another God. There was a lot more to it. You're right. There was a lot more to it. Right. There was a lot more going on there. And the funny thing is, when you read that story, you find out that 3,000 people were killed after that. Moses told the tribe of Levi to arm themselves with swords and kill people.
They were even to drink water made from the dust of that golden calf.
It was bad.
And that just kind of popped up.
Yeah.
Aaron said,
That's one of the times God called the children of Israel a stiff-necked people.
Exactly.
But no, they were not put into the ark. The ark hadn't even been made yet. Moses gets down off the mountain, gets mad, and tosses them, and they get broken. Now, there was another set made. So the next question is, how were the second tables of the law provided? Well, we know the first tables of the law were provided when God wrote the tables, wrote on the stone, right? So the second tables of the law, how do you think? Did you think Moses did it again? Did it himself? Exodus chapter 34, verse 1. And the Lord said unto Moses. Now, again, this is after Moses comes down, finds out what's going on. So between chapter 32, verse 19, and chapter 34, verse 1, a lot of bad stuff happened to the children of Israel as a result of what Moses came down and saw. A lot of bad stuff happened. We don't go into that for this lesson, but that is a month worth of lessons by itself. Because, as Brother Bernie mentioned, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that happened that caused the punishment that they suffered.
There was a lot of perversion going on. Let me just say that.
There was a lot of
Orgies were going on. It was just, it made the sailor blush.
it was bad news, very bad news. And God was not happy, nor was Moses happy when he came down. So, second tables of the law. Exodus chapter 34, verse 1, and the Lord said unto Moses, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest. So Moses made 2 tables of stone like the first, and God wrote on them again. Wasn't the first time? Second time worked. Now, the second set were put in the Ark of the Covenant. First set weren't put in the Ark of the Covenant. Matter of fact, the first set, they didn't even come down to tell them to make the Ark of the Covenant yet before they got broke. The second set lasted. So when and where was the tabernacle set up? Now remember, here we are a certain amount of time, and I'm not sure, I didn't actually look to get the exact, which probably would have been an interesting little note here, but I didn't actually look to see exactly when God gave the law to Moses and wrote it, and he came down. But we do know when and where the tabernacle was actually set up. So Exodus chapter 40 and verse number 17. And it came to pass in the first month of the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up. A couple of interesting little notes. The first day of the month, first day of the first month of the second year, location in the center of the camp. You will not find it in that verse. First day of the first month of the second year. Second year, you're like, they've been alive for a long time. Why is it the second year? Because the second year, based upon the Hebrew calendar, that God started the night of the Passover in Egypt. If you remember, if you go back to the Passover in Egypt, God said, this is the first day of the first month of the year. That's why the Hebrews have a different calendar. Because God said, this is your day. This starts your year. The next thing, Numbers chapter 2, verse 2 states that the tabernacle should be in the center of the camp. So if you've ever heard that, the tabernacle is the center of the camp, where do we get that? Numbers chapter 2, verse 2 is where it states that. And then it actually states where each tribe should be in relation to the tabernacle in the center of the camp.
Brother Jamie, also it's interesting. There's kind of a symbolism there, in the sense that tabernacle being in the center of camp, that was the center of their life.
Yes, yes.
And symbolically, you even add this, that the New Testament church among God's people, that needs to be the center of their life.
I'm glad you said that, because you're right. The children of Israel, the center of their life was the tabernacle. The symbolism of that is that God was the center. Because you remember, in the tabernacle, there was a cloud over the tabernacle by day, and there was fire over the tabernacle by night.
Yes.
They had a huge night light.
Yes.
That meant that God was in his house. He was home. For a light was on, he was
Jamie, I'm sorry, go ahead.
and everyone was based around that. And everyone's houses or tents were facing that. You may not be able to see it, but you knew where the center was. You knew where the tabernacle was because everybody, the front flap of everyone's tent faced the tabernacle. It's just like you can ask an Arab which way is Mecca. They know. They're raised from birth. They know exactly where it is, right? The Israelites, while they were in the wilderness, always knew where the center of their life was. And then you fast forward to up to, 50, 60 years ago, at least here in the U.S., everyone's life was around church, was centered around church.
Yes, yes.
Church was, all your plans were based on church. There was a reason why that when you were to exclude someone, you were not to help them. You were to put them without. Excuse me. The entire community's focus was church. When you have no help, when there is no one you can turn to, you turn to God quick, fast, and in a hurry. There was a reason for that. You put them without, they got to get right with God. And no one was going to help them. No one was going to have anything to do with them until they got right with God. And today, we struggle to have people come to Sunday morning service, much less Sunday night, much less Wednesday night. Why? Because the center of our lives is not God anymore. It's not his church. We have other GODs instead of the GOD. You were going to say something. Yes, sir.
With that being said, I learned a lot about the churches in Cage Cove community. And what you said was exactly that whether you were Presbyterian or Methodist, whatever, the center of that group, that was church. If they were excluded, well, in the basic life was dependent on barter. They didn't go down, they didn't have the
Yeah.
stores. So if you were excluded out of church, you were kind of out of luck.
Yes, if you were excluded, you were in trouble.
Exactly.
And the way it was then, if the Baptist church excluded you, the Presbyterian church wasn't going to help you.
Exactly.
The Methodist church, none of them were going to help you.
Exactly.
It was like if they excluded you, that was for good reason. And all the churches did it.
Exactly.
Next question that Dr. Bogard brings is, what were the offerings of sacrifice under the law? Now, there was quite a few, but they had specific meanings and specific reasons. The whole burnt offering was the main. The next one that's listed is the sin offering. Then there's the peace offering. The meat offering, and I promise, Sister Katie, when I get to the end, I'll pause and let you finish writing them down.
I could write everything and leave out offering.
The trespass offering. And the red heifer offering. Heifer. Not a word I spell very often, so I have to look at it. Now, 6 different offerings, and I didn't give all of the verses for them. You're going to have to check out Leviticus and the book of Numbers to get all the details of each of them. But these were all types of Christ, and an account is given of them in Leviticus and in the book of Numbers. There's more to the book of Numbers than just numbers. A lot more to it. One of the reasons of the genealogy given in Numbers, which we all know about, if you've been in church and Sunday school very often or very long, you've at least heard that the lineage of Jesus is in Numbers, one of the reasons for it. But there's also another reason for it, and that was in the wilderness when they were setting up their tents, you were set up by lineage. One, by tribe. You had a certain location. And then how close you were to the center was based upon your lineage. If you're the fifth son, well, guess what? You got 4 sons in front of you. Their tents are closer to the front than yours. But everybody knew their lineage. The next question that Dr. Garner asked is, when was the year of Jubilee and how was it observed? This is actually a very interesting question, and if you look at it in depth, and we're going to read the verses about it, but quite a few verses here, actually. Leviticus chapter 25, verses 8 through 17. And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years, and the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. I looked at that about 15 times and went, okay, so it's 49, it's actually 50 years. But I got very confused when I was reading all that. And apparently my math is really bad. So if 50 years is not right, someone let me know. I'll be happy to say I was wrong. Verse number 9, then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubilee shall that 50th year be unto you. That's where I got the 50th year, because I couldn't do the math on that other piece. Ye shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thine vine undressed. For it is the Jubilee. It shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. Come on. And if thou sell aught unto thy neighbor, or buyest aught of thy neighbor's hand, ye shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee thou shalt buy of thy neighbor, and according unto the number of years of the fruits he shall sell unto thee. Again, I didn't get the whole math part on that, but there is math there for you to look at. According to the multitude of years thou shalt increase the price thereof, and according to the fewness of years thou shalt diminish the price of it. For according to the number of the years of the fruits doth he sell unto thee. Basically, plus or minus, it's set in stone. Ye shall not therefore oppress one another, but thou shalt fear thy God, for I am the Lord your God. Every 50th year was the year of liberty. It was a year of liberty. Like I said, there was a whole lot to that. There's a whole lot about how it's observed. I just shortened it up to it was a year of liberty. The final question we are going to look at tonight, and we will have just made it halfway through Dr. Bogard's lesson 5. Hopefully we can finish lesson 5 next time and not have to go to a C. But the last question I want to talk about tonight is, what is the first statement in the law concerning the tithes? Now, there's a lot of stuff in the law about tithing. Tithing is huge in the law. And at some point, we're going to actually do a study on tithing. But this is the first statement of the law concerning tithes, found in Leviticus chapter 27, verse number 30. And all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy unto the Lord. The answer to the question there, all the tithe of the land is the Lord's and is holy unto him. Yes.
We talked about the seed of the land and all of that. We don't concept of trees being lasting, centuries used, or anything else lasting, like they have over there. But that's the reason they can say the tithe of the land and the seed and all that is because it lasts that long.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't have that here, but they do, and it's amazing.
You know, it's funny. We look at things now. You know, you buy a house, and 10 years later you sell it and you move somewhere else. And, you know, you may have 3 or 4 homes over your lifespan, right, that you've purchased and sold, what have you. I made a trip. I did a couple of jobs in Turkey, and I made a trip to every time I flew to Istanbul. And a little interesting tidbit: the wall, the original wall, stood for over 1,000 years, is still there in Istanbul. And interestingly enough, there's homes that are still in the city walls, okay? Still belonging to family that lived there when the walls were built, descendants, okay? And they won't sell it. They won't get rid of it. That's their family legacy, is living in that home. It may be too small, it may have all kinds of problems, but they would never, ever leave it. Children of Israel are kind of the same way. Land meant something. That was a legacy from God. The land that you were given, that your tribe was given, was a legacy from God. Excuse me. And that's why the seed of the land was God's. That meant something to them. I mean, you look even now, farmers that are going under, that are having to sell their land, 150 years this farm's been in their family, and now they can't make any money. They can't make a living having to sell their land and get out of the farming business, right? I mean, you see it over and over and over again. Well, that's what that's all about. We're short-timers, and we don't think about that. But God's not a short-timer, and God was in it for the long haul. And he gave that land to his people in that area and said to hold on to it. And sadly, they didn't. And he gave it away. Now he's giving it back to them. Any other questions, comments? I got the 49 part, but it seemed like there was more to it than just 49. I was trying to figure that out, and it was like 7 years of 7 Sabbaths, and I was like I said, there was too many sevens, and the way it was worded, I was like, yeah,
It did sound like it should be 7 times 7 times 7.
yeah, I was like, wait, did I? And then as I read in the verses, and the 50th year, I said, all right, good, it's the 50th year. That's the answer, the 50th year. Yes, sir.
Also with this right here, and it wasn't just the tithe either. I mean, there was other things in that, but there's a principle to that even we relate now. I mean, we're not under the law, but there's a principle to that.
That's true.
As long as they did that, God would take care of them.
Yes, yes. As long as they followed his law, they took care of them. And you're right, we're not under the law. We're under grace.
We're under the principle of that. It's interesting.
But, and this is where I really want to do a study on tithing, because, you know, we say 10% of what we make, but the Jews didn't give 10% of what they made.
And if they didn't, there was interest on that.
Yes, they gave more than a 10%, in all honesty. It wasn't just a 10% of this, it was a 10% of all.
And then there was offerings on top of it.
And then there was offerings on top of that.
Yep.
You know, we talk about we say this word, tithes and offerings.
Yeah.
So, anybody grew up in church and you had special offerings, you had a love offering, you had offering for this and offering for that. Then you had your tithes. That plate might go around 4 times. And guess what? You didn't take out of your tithe pocket to put in the other offerings. That was above and beyond. And we say love offerings now. And love offering, it's a little bit. Most people pull out their wallet and be like, well, what can I spare? Yeah, the mission offering. Well, what can I spare? You know, we have one here. We call it, we are doing better this year than last year. This is our mission offering, right? Spare change. Sadly, it's spare change, right? God didn't ask for that. God asked for the first fruits. Anyway, that's a whole different subject. But there was a reason for that. As God blessed, they gave back. What was his? They gave him what it was his already. It was his to begin with. They were just giving it to him. Any other comments, questions about the lesson? If not, we'll go ahead and go to the Lord in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the